Afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Robert Baylor, Director of Communications at NUCA. Welcome to our latest Webinar Wednesday, sponsored by NUCA National Partner CNA. Today's webinar, Identifying and Reducing Social Engineering, Attacks in the Construction Industry, addresses another destructive aspect of the COVID-19 pandemic emergency, and one that affects utility construction businesses in all 50 states. Cybersecurity leader Symantec has data that reveals 1 out of every 39 construction industry email users gets targeted by phishing attacks. Overall, it is estimated that cybercrime damage cost businesses and individuals an astounding $1.5 trillion in 2018. Phishing, also known as social engineering, is a cybercrime that can affect construction businesses of all sizes. Through email or malicious websites, the crime works by manipulating people by posing as a trustworthy organization. Attackers often take advantage of current events, such as the 2020 coronavirus pandemic, by baiting unsuspecting executives or managers with discounted or free offers of hard-to-find goods, or exploiting human nature and a desire to help others. In today's webinar, NUCA Diamond National Partner CNA's risk experts, Paul Goj and Terry Smith, will help NUCA members identify clues in recognizing social engineering email attacks, the clues that give away phone and text scams, and will help you identify risk mitigation controls that you and your company can use to stop these costly crimes. Terry Smith is responsible for leading and advancing CNA's risk control strategy for the technology segment, which includes research and risk assessment for complex technology accounts, conducts risk assessments on a higher level of cyber liability accounts, research into emerging risk and data privacy. Terry has 29 years of insurance industry experience, which has involved risk assessment and customer service, having served as a field risk control specialist, consultant, manager, and consulting director. He has been in the industry since 1984 and with CNA since 1986. He is the company's risk control consulting director in construction, manufacturing, technology. Over the past 15 years, he has been supporting the technology segment, evaluating risks in software development and technology service providers. Now let's get started. Terry and Paul, I turn the webinar over to you.
Thank you, Robert. Good afternoon, everyone, and I hope your day is going well from wherever you might be calling from. I bring you greetings this afternoon from North Carolina, and I hope, again, wherever you may be, I hope this webinar today finds you safe, finds you well. I appreciate, and on behalf of CNA and Paul and some of my colleagues that are on the line, I noticed, I appreciate you taking the time for being here today, and I know it's valuable time. The very fact that you're attending demonstrates interest, demonstrates that you understand this is something you need to know a little more about, and recognition brings you halfway to a solution. So we'll continue on. I'll go ahead. I'm going to put up, I don't normally do this, but I'm going to go ahead and put up a little apology right out of the gate, violating a rule of speaking. Occasionally you may see an email pop up. I did not close my email out properly, so my colleagues will really have fun jumping on the tech guy for making that faux pas. But we'll carry on. Basically, I'd like to point this out, that essentially what this says is if Paul and I don't know what we're talking about today, it's not our fault. Seriously, though, there may be some opinions expressed today, so the disclaimer is very important. And seriously, the fact is that, as noted by Robert, Paul and I are part of a team at CNA. We regularly evaluate companies' exposures and controls to cyber and privacy protection. And this is a human issue we're going to talk about today, that technology alone, engineering controls alone aren't going to solve everything. We want to concentrate today on really, it's interesting, but this is some low-hanging fruit, and that is our human behavior while we're online. Low-hanging, yes. Big benefits, absolutely. Is it simple? It can be. But again, the benefits of each of us today taking ownership of our own cyber behavior. It can save us, it can save our families, it can save our companies large sums of money. I emphasize that enough, and later on I'm going to give you some really current information on money that we're talking about. Each of us can make a difference in what we're in this. Really, I don't mean to make a joke, but the word that instantly popped into my mind, this pandemic of ransomware that we're going through right now, it is an explosion. It ebbs and flows, ransomware does, social engineering behavior. We're going to be talking a little bit about ransomware specifically. And I'm telling you, it's exploding. And I'll give you some facts to back that up. But generally speaking, cyber crime, I want to show you some of these numbers here. You can look at those for yourself. The point is, I just want to give you a sense of the scale of the problem in cyber crime that the world is facing. Social engineering, what we're talking about today, frankly, we're talking about confidence schemes, scam artists. We're talking about crimes that have been around since time began. And as technology evolves, the style of the crime evolves with it, if you will. So there's loads of different crazy facts out there, and you can go look those up for yourself. Just type in something in a search engine, and you'd be amazed at what might come up. Let's just say big numbers. How about that? But here's the thing: and really, when we started this presentation format at the end of April, actually. Companies that previously had not done this, companies were of all sizes, were allowing their employees to work remotely from their offices. You in the industries represented here today, you're used to that. And yet the technology you use on the job site has exploded. And again, as I was saying, so whether you're used to working remotely with a connected device or whether that's new to you, from working in an office, really more than ever before, we're finding that companies may not have been fully prepared for this, or they've not adapted to the environment that we're in now. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today. Quick war story. This is something I fear that the attendees today are all too familiar with, and if not personally, that you know somebody in your industry that has experienced this. There was a church in the Midwest not long ago. They'd been on about a 5-month long, $5.5 million renovation program, and along the way, they had been paying their bills as they came in at various performance marks. But towards the end, the church administrator got a notice, and they were quite surprised, as you could imagine, being a church, that the contractor had not received a final $1.7 million payment. And they were really perplexed by that. They'd been paying their bills. Here's the point. At some point along the way, and this is what we're going to be talking about today, some point along the way, somebody had gotten into their email, so the company's email, the church's email system. And in the course of that, the routing numbers for the wire transfer had been altered. And $1.7 million disappeared. I'm sad to say, as I tell you this story, I don't know if this particular church got their money back. But real quickly, in the time I have, I had an account that I looked at just yesterday. You're going to like this. They had the very same thing happen to them. And I will tell you, they are an account that CNA provides cyber liability insurance for. Long story short, they were able to get the money back. So they chose not to file a claim. And that's okay. They got their money back, and that's really the bottom line. Except, what about fixing what caused the breach to start with? And for that, we have no information. So, moving on, we're going to talk today about identifying clues used in social engineering, email attacks, and phone and texting scams. And we'll talk a little bit more about risk mitigation controls, things you can do. And I want to emphasize this right now, things you can do without spending a lot of money, because we recognize today you have limited funds available for that. You're operating on thin margins, a lot of you anyway. It's the nature of what you do. And again, in the times we're in, it becomes even harder. But the things that we're going to share with you today, I really seriously can make a huge difference and can be the difference. Remember this little fact, I always like to use this. We have to be right, you and me, our companies, we have to be right 100% of the time in our defense for social engineering or any other kind of cyber attack, 100% of the time. The bad guy only has to be right one time. One time is all it takes. So anything we can do to lessen that opportunity, the better off we are. Paul, go ahead.
Great. So does it sound okay here?
Yeah, we're good.
Good, great. So yeah, this is Paul here, and I'm going to just go into a little bit more depth on the things Terry's talking about, just to help you understand maybe where they're coming from and some of the methods and techniques these guys are using. But you hear about social engineering. Well, phishing is really just one form of social engineering, where they're trying to trick you, bait you, trying to get you to provide really private information without really something you would have done so normally. But there's a lot of other methods that are being used to trick us. There's, we'll talk about pretexting. That's where you typically get something on a phone call. Maybe they're calling from your bank, and they sound legitimate, and they're trying to get you to give away more information. There's a lot of cases where there's been something we call posing, where a criminal will dress up like an exterminator, fire marshal, kind of a technical person with a uniform on, and they can go right into a company, and we will just let them walk in. And they can take we have a lot of information on paper. We're talking about some digital things today, but you have a lot of critical private information on paper. We'll talk about spearfishing. Spearfishing is where it's a targeted attack towards more of a key person in a company, maybe an accounting person, CFO, someone like that. But just because we have become so dependent on digital tools to run our businesses today, we really have to stop and think a little bit more about what we're doing, especially right now, like what we've talked about, specifically just with the pandemic. So many more people are, working remotely, working from home, and, emails they may not normally open up. They're clicking on those. They're clicking on attachments. A lot of times our security controls around our home computers or working from home may not be quite as strong as they would be working in, say, an office environment. So next, we'll talk about, what some of these phishing attacks might look like. Terry, you get to the next slide there. So as far as phishing goes, phishing is definitely the most effective form of social engineering. The criminals are really good at this method to trick us. And typically phishing comes through, emails. Often it can be like what Robert talked about, tracking you to a malicious website, or, we call it spoofing, but it's a website that's got, something embedded in it that if you open up that website, that you potentially downloaded, a virus onto your computer. Often it's going to be businesses that you recognize the logo. You'll recognize UPS or FedEx, or take your choice of banks that you would recognize their logo. The IRS. We saw lots of, phishing attacks. We usually do every year in, March and early April as people are getting ready to, file taxes. And because it's on your mind, you're more quickly going to open something up without maybe stopping and thinking a little bit about what you're doing. Natural disasters, definitely they have used this one for a long time. Say charities that are seeking, financial help, say from a hurricane or some kind of a flood. Often what they're doing is they'll send out spam emails. They're sending these out to literally millions and millions of email addresses, just knowing that certain people are going to click on them. But they'll have in a subject line, thank you so much for your support, or thank you for the help that you have given us. And it's going to make you want to go, who did I give to? I don't remember giving away some money, financial assistance. So we'll click on those things and open them up. The current health crisis definitely is being manipulated. The CDC actually posted an article about 3 weeks ago just talking about the increases in phone scams and phishing attacks. And again, that's coming from the CDC, who's obviously watching everything that's going on. A little bit more about how to identify a phishing attack on the next slide there. Some key things that they're going to look for often is account information, passwords, your logon information. Often there'll be an attachment that they'll want you to click on. And again, those attachments, the way they can be designed is there's embedded, software code in that Word document that if you open that up, you probably just downloaded something to your network. Personal information, definitely. We want to verify your bank account information. We want to, confirm your Social Security number. Often we'll ask about that. Grammar is something to watch because they'll often misspell your personal information. They'll misspell your name. And again, these may be some spear phishing attacks, but again, they're criminals. They may not be, really, using every method that they could. But yeah, grammar can be incorrect, but always there's going to be urgency. There's always going to be a sense of urgency about these attacks. Now, let me talk about wire transfer fraud, or what the FBI calls a business email compromise. They named this, I think, back about 7 years ago, because they started seeing a lot of these attacks where, funds are actually transferred to a bogus, individual who you think is somebody that you would normally do business with. It's also known as CEO fraud. But the FBI began tracking this around 2013. They have identified criminal groups that have been targeting small companies, medium-sized companies in every U.S. state and at least 100 countries around the world. And, the method that they use is, first they'll probably start with some kind of a spearfishing attack. And the way they have done that is, you can just go to, anybody's social media account. I mean, a lot of businesses today have a social media presence just for, marketing and advertising. And they can learn things about a company. They can identify individuals in the company, again, the CFO, accountant. And they can target an attack to that individual. And again, if they open up that email, they'll probably get some kind of malicious software. We call it malware. And often what these individuals will do is they will sit on a company network for weeks at a time, just learning about how what vendors you work with, or what's the, CEO's style of communication, like what does email style look like. And they will often use, again, social media and see that maybe there's some corporate event and people are out of the office, CEOs out of the office. That's when they'll use that right time to send this bogus email to a targeted person like finance, again, bookkeeping, accounting, controller. And they'll say, we need to make an immediate wire transfer to a vendor that you're used to working with, or maybe one of your subcontractors that you're used to working with. But the account numbers are slightly different. And, the transfer, like Terry talked about in that first example, it can literally be tens of thousands of dollars. I know from just our claim history, I think the average wire transfer claims that we paid last year was about $50,000. So that tells you that some were less and some were a lot more. Let's talk about ransomware now. And I can tell you, corporately, we just had a phone call earlier this morning just talking about the increase in ransomware that we have seen in the last, say, 6 months. Ransomware is not new. It's been going on for at least 5 years, but 5 years ago, if I ask any of you on the call, have you heard about people, having their network shut down and they had to pay a ransom? You would probably say, yes, I've heard about it, and they usually ask for $300 or $400 or $500, and you pay that, and in most cases, you get the key to get back into your company network, and you're back in business. That has changed significantly over the last 2 years. They begin to target not individuals as much, but small businesses and medium-sized businesses, and the ransom demands are much, much higher. So, and we've even seen a lot of companies that, because they need their websites to do business, when their websites get shut down, they have now business interruption claims because, they can't operate. And so we'll talk in a minute about some more of the things that you can do to prepare for something like this so that maybe you're not out of business or you don't even have to pay a fine. But the first thing I would say is you want to keep your systems patched. What we mean by that is most people use, Microsoft systems still, and they send out security patches on a regular basis. They always come out on Tuesdays. And if you have your computer set up to automatically download those patches, security patches, then you most likely will avoid a lot of these, these issues. We will find when we have done what we call computer forensics, when there's been some large breaches and large claims, we go back in and look at the systems, and we find out that there may have been weeks or months worth of security patches that were not downloaded. So first of all, patch. Secondly, backup. I'm guessing everyone on this call has some form of backup of your, critical information for your company. Used to, if you did it, say once a week, maybe once a month, you might be okay. But in this environment, it really needs to be a daily backup so that if you get an event like this with ransomware, you can basically recover your information from your backup, and you may lose a few hours or a day of business. Lastly, I'll mention it now, training, and we'll mention it again here in a few minutes, but training of what are the events, what are the things that are causing, people to click on things, open things. Employees have to be trained. And I know we're talking about in the construction business right now, but it does not matter the industry today. If you use computers, there has to be some kind of training about what to recognize. Let me wrap up this section just talking about these phone and text attacks. Again, the phone attack is someone calling, appearing to be someone else, appearing to be a manager, appearing to be, some executive, or it could be like the IT department. I'm calling because we noticed some suspicious activity going on, in the network, and we want to confirm some things. And of course, they're going to ask for usernames and passwords, probably. They're also going to have some kind of sense of urgency. Like we need to take care of this before something, significant happens in your network. So again, that urgency is their method. Other things that, there may be an invoice attached and not a lot of information. It'll say, you get a text that says, hey, you need to look at this invoice. We see some discrepancies. So maybe you open it up on your mobile device, or you just go to your laptop, you open it up, and that invoice was laced with something that that you weren't expecting. Because online shopping is so huge right now, people are constantly getting, emails or texts about shipping information, order information, and some of these now are being manipulated because we just so quickly open those up, and people are getting some kind of, viruses along with those as well. Okay, Terry.
Very good. So we're going to move into now just a little bit of mitigation controls, things you can do. And here's a spoiler alert. You've already heard most of what I'm getting ready to say in some fashion or another. And that's planned. Because here's the thing. As far as our social behavior goes, as I said at the start, recognition is halfway to a solution. We have a whole nother presentation. Paul's got one slide in a few minutes. He's going to talk about engineering controls. We have a whole presentation on engineering controls, and we're happy to present that sometime. What we're talking about is your personal human behavior. We're going to keep it simple, but simple works. So controls for phishing attacks. You've heard this, but if the key word here on this slide is unsolicited, if you didn't solicit it, if it's something you didn't request, be especially cautious. I ask you to really stop, breathe, think about what you're doing before you do it. I guarantee that's a safety message you're presenting out in the field to your employees. Forgive me for the bad pun, but it's the same principle as measure twice, cut once. It really is. Think about what you're doing. Stop. We get in a hurry. It's our human behavior. It's natural. We get in a hurry. Stop and think about it. The sender may look legitimate, but use care before clicking on that link or attachment. And if you have any doubt at all, and I hope you do, maybe just pause for a moment. Pick up the phone. Call the supposed sender using a good number, one that you know is accurate, to verify that email. Supply house, another contractor, something like that, architect, whatever the engineer, whatever the case may be. Just stop and think about it. And again, Paul noted the URL, the website address the end of it may have a different extension. You may be used to .com and you see .net, .org, .ie, .ru. Something like that. RU being Russia, for example. Phishing scams will ask for personal information and some type of verification, pretty much a guarantee most of the time on that. And again, there's a tone of urgency. You work in an industry, you're on deadlines, you got things going on, there may be a change order, who knows? There's always that sense of urgency. Just stop and think about it. You can search, you can go spot a phishing email and then look at the images and you'll get great examples of what that looks like. And I encourage you to do that and sit down with your team and do that. Paul mentioned training. Sit down with your team and do just that. That's a training topic right there on how to spot these things. Then you can pull up the images. For a phone or text attack, phone scams they're tough on businesses. I'll give you an example. My personal phones. If I don't know the number, if it doesn't come up as one of my contacts, if it doesn't, something I readily recognize, I'm probably not going to answer it most of the time. If it's that important, they're going to leave me an email. Okay? You're a business. You don't always have that luxury, and I understand that. But whoever is answering the phone, you could be on the job site, it could be somebody back at the office. Again, stop and think. Robert said, like Robert said, he listened for a moment, send him some information, so forth. That's fine. You can always just hang up. You can always just hang up. And then be careful. You don't want to provide sensitive details over the phone. For example, your bank will not ask you for that. Unless, something's been verified, they won't do it. They sure won't do it on an email. Okay. Government agency, they won't ask you for it. Don't click on anything unsolicited in a text. This next one's very important. Beware of readily replying stop to an unsolicited text. Now, we're used to having that option, for example, with our doctors and whatnot, or some other service. And we might be used to that. But when you hit stop, if you reply back to a stop, then the scammer on the other end knows they got a live, active phone number. That's like taking the bait, if you will. You can report suspicious messages to your carrier. You can file a complaint with the FCC, particularly if that scammer uses a voicemail, because they're keeping track of this and they're starting to get aggressive. Many state attorney general's offices are really getting aggressive on enforcing this now. Federal Trade Commission is starting to get active and taking action. These are programs within our governmental services you can feel good about because things are happening for the better. You have a blocking tool that you can block a number. You can file that complaint. Don't readily believe in caller ID. Another quick war story. We'll keep moving forward to keep interest of our time. I don't know who it is, but I regularly get a spoof message come up on my phone, and it says, it's me. It says Terry Smith. I said, now, wait a minute. Now, I carry two phones. I carry a work phone. I carry a personal phone. I know it's not my wife. That's a dead giveaway right there. So it's interesting. That one pops up, and I have fun with that one every now and then. Paul's already talked about do not agree to pay for anything up front. And here's the bottom line. One of the simplest controls you can do, just hang up. Just hang up. I want to point this out to you here on the bottom. You can sign up for free scam alerts from the FTC. FTC has a great host of resources. I want to encourage all of you on here, no matter what size your business may be. I want to encourage every one of you to investigate Federal Trade Commission cybersecurity for small business web pages. Here's the clue. I don't care what size your business is. There is good information here for whatever business you are. You're looking for training tips. You're looking for engineering control tips. You're looking for the things we've been talking about today. It is an excellent resource. I encourage you to visit the ftc.gov. Sign up for those alerts, if you will. Let me talk a little bit about your industry, the construction industry specifically. These are things we've seen. Most of the information you're seeing here comes from a research report that guys like Paul and me look forward to every year. It's called the Verizon, yes, the phone carrier, the wireless carrier, the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report. It comes out once a year based on information they've obtained over the previous year. It is an excellent, shall we say, state of the union of what's going on with data breaches across all industry segments. What we see in the construction industry? We see web application attacks, social engineering attacks. The use of stolen credentials remains a problem. Let me clue y'all in on something, and Paul's going to touch on this in a minute. There's every reason to believe, as I'm talking to each and every one of you right now, there's every reason to believe you have some credentials that are on the dark web, that somewhere along the line they've been compromised in some fashion from some vendor. Pick some of the major data breaches, particularly in the retail industry or the credit card industry over the last several years, or a major credit reporting service where about 144 million Americans got hit. There's a good chance you're on that list. You've probably received notice of that before. Consider and Paul's going to touch on this, but I'll say it now. Get into a habit of changing your passwords. Paul will touch on that a little bit more. You've got a very real problem coming up in the construction industry now of devices being hacked, security cameras, vehicle telematics, industrial control systems. Your industry, like I say, technology in the construction related fields has exploded. Some of you may be involved in developing new products yourself. You may be involved in software writing. I've seen several companies doing that. Or there may be some type of internet connected device, something that might measure something or sense something, a sensor for flow or various things like that. You may be involved in that. What security precautions have you taken to lock down that code, to make sure it's secure, to lock down that device that it's going to be more difficult to hack? These are things you need to consider. If you take credit cards in your business, you should be aware of controls you have to abide by in that aspect. Paul mentioned the issues of network interruption. If your business depends on it in this day and age, you're probably receiving drawings, engineering documents, things like that are coming through your network. How secure is that? These are things you need to take into consideration. Paul's going to cover a lot more of this in just a second. Paul, I'm going to give it to you. We can hit on more of this in the controls. I want to keep mindful of our time. Go ahead, Paul.
Great. So again, if we were in a venue where we could, see each other face to face, I'm sure there'd be some good dialogue about things that you guys have seen and heard about in the industry. But we've had a lot of claim examples, loss examples of things that you may be familiar with. There's a kind of virus that can happen when you click on some emails, malicious websites. It's called a key logging software, and it actually will log the keystrokes that you put in on a computer. And criminals will use this a lot of times when you're accessing a bank, bank account information. There was a recent, it was an industrial maintenance and construction company, and they got that software on their network, and the guys actually, they call it cyber heist. They stole money out of their account, several $100,000 actually, about $327 out of their account. There was another case where there was a small construction company that had employee records and 1099 records on their network. And of course, there was private information, tax information, social security numbers. What the criminals did, they accessed all that information and they held it for 1 year because they know that usually people get 1 year credit monitoring if there's been some kind of a breach. After that year was up, they started opening up, getting loans based on some of this information, and there was a lot of damages occurred. And I mean, with the defense costs, privacy expenses, and all the damages to the customers, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. And again, it was just a small construction company, but they had critical private information, employees and stuff. So that's why, we're trying to go through some of these things quickly. But you all know that, it's a real issue out there. So here's some really good things you can do. You've probably heard about, disk encryption on your laptops. It basically just, it changes information from maybe text, which you might read, to something that's sort of unrecognizable. And if you have any kind of an IT group or even an IT vendor that you may use, they can help you with encryption. That's real important to have. Unsupported operating systems. That would be like still using Windows 7 or Windows 8. Hopefully, if the only thing you get out of this call today, if you're using those systems, is that you'll go out and get some new systems, because those are not supported anymore. There's no security patches anymore. So you'd want to move to like a Windows 10 if you're in the Microsoft world. Multi-factor authentication. This is very important when people are logging in outside the company network. So what does multi-factor mean? It means, two things, like a username and a password, or a username and like a token. So if I'm trying to log into my, company computer from my home, I have to put in a token number that I get off of my iPhone, and every 30 seconds it gives me a new number. So it's a changing number, and that limits someone being able to access, my network. But multi-factor authentication is very important for people that are, logging in outside the company network. Security awareness training, we've touched on training, but, it's important, again, today in this environment that some of these topics are discussed. There's a lot of, places where you can get a good one-page document and cover 4 or 5 things with your staff, and do it a couple of times a year. I would say this password management, may be one of the real key things here, because most people use the same 1 or 2 passwords on just about everything they do. So first of all, you would want to have a policy where, they're changed, say, every 90 days on key things, that, again, company network access, of course, bank account access. But there's something called a password manager. If you've ever heard of that, there's companies like LastPass, Dashlane. There's a lot of different managers where you learn one long, complex password, and then that manager will hold all of your other passwords inside. And so it's a lot more protected than what most people have. But again, there's like Terry said, we could spend, probably another 30, 45 minutes just on some more controls in depth. But hopefully this has given you a little bit of an overview of some of the key things that are going on, what threats are out there, what to look for, and how to control some of these things, so that you don't become a victim of this cyber crime that's very prevalent right now. And Terry, I'll take it back to you.
Okay, we'll go back over some things here that hopefully you picked up some clues. Recognition, I can't emphasize this enough today, recognition. And recognition is actually control in this case. So I do encourage you to reflect on that. This presentation, well, I'm going to turn it back over to Robert in a minute, but I have supplied the presentation to Robert and his team for use and reference as may be. But at this point, I'm going to close it out and turn it back over to Robert and our hosts if there are any questions that we can address.
Thank you, Terry. If there are any questions, this is the perfect time to ask them. You can either do it through, I suppose, because we only have less than 30 people on the call. You can always just unmute yourself, or you can, if you don't want to do that, you can certainly chat, send me a message in the chat feature. It's up to you. And I don't see anyone clamoring to the front, which always says to me, Terry, you did a terrific job presenting it. I know I certainly learned a lot, especially in my own instance that I relayed to everyone before the call started. Give me one last second. If there are any questions? And let's go and wrap this up. Terry and Paul, thank you very much for your time today to present this information to our guests. We would also like to thank CNA for their very kind support of Nuke and its programs. We cannot do any of this industry outreach without our national partners' participation. A recording of this webinar will be made available to all registrants in the next day or two, and will also be available on the nuka.com website, along with the PDF of Terry and Paul's presentation. And thank you for your time today to join us for Webinar Wednesday, Supporting Nuka. Our next webinar will be held Wednesday, July 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern, titled Preparing for the Next Phase, Critical Considerations for the Construction Industry, presented by Nuka member Hub International on COVID-19 Workplace Guidance. Thank you for your time this afternoon, and please enjoy the rest of your week.